Ever feel like you missed the memo on how money actually works?
Right.
Like there's this whole rule book everyone else got.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, today we're diving into a book that claims to break it all down. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
It's funny, right? That title alone, it's like instantly polarizing.
It
But
is.
it's become a cult classic for a reason. People are still talking about it, what, like decades later?
And it was huge when it came out, at least in my world.
Oh, yeah.
But we want to go beyond just summarizing, right? We're
Yeah.
digging into what actually holds up, what's maybe a little outdated, and how you listening can apply these ideas.
Exactly, because like any book, especially one about money, you can't just take it as gospel. You got to filter it, see what works for your life.
Exactly. And that's what this whole deep dive is about. And one of Kiyosaki's biggest points is this whole contrast between the rich dad and the poor dad mindsets.
Right, and it's not about demonizing anyone's parents or saying like, oh, one's good, one's bad with their finances.
Right.
It's more about the way they think about money, the beliefs they have, which, let's be honest, get passed down to us whether we realize it or not.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like ingrained from childhood.
Totally.
And Kiyosaki throws it right out there in the title, right?
Yeah.
He had these two father figures, his own dad, the poor dad,
Mhm.
and then his friend's dad, the rich dad. Each had totally different approaches to money.
And that's where things get interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
he drops this bomb early on in the book. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them.
Yeah, he doesn't waste any time, does he?
No. Straight to it.
And I remember when I first read that, I was like, yeah, obviously, that's the dream. But also, like, how? How do I actually make that happen?
Right. It's almost like frustratingly simple, you know?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
But just hearing it put that way, it kind of shifts your perspective.
Totally. And I think that's the point. It's not even necessarily about glorifying being rich. It's more like forcing you to examine that relationship you have with money. Are you on that treadmill of trading time for dollars?
Right.
Or are you building something that can generate income even when you're not actively working?
Ooh, I like that. So it's not about being lazy. It's about being strategic.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do these rich dad versus poor dad philosophies actually play out in real life?
So Kiyosaki uses these two figures as examples, right? Like two different scripts people often follow with their finances. The poor dad, and again, not a value judgment, but he represents that more traditional path. Get good grades, go to college if that's your thing, find a stable job, work hard, climb a ladder, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get ahead.
Oof, does that sound familiar or what?
Right. It's what we're all told.
Yeah, the classic, like, American dream almost.
Exactly, exactly. And look, there's nothing inherently wrong with that path, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But what Kiyosaki argues is that it often leads to what he calls the rat race. You're just stuck working to pay bills, never quite getting ahead, always feeling like you're one emergency away from financial disaster.
Ooh, rat race. Too real, man.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners are feeling that one right now. Okay, so we're talking rat race, feeling stuck. How does Rich Dad escape that? Does he just, like, win the lottery or something?
Haha, I wish it were that easy.
Right.
No, his big thing is building assets, things that actually put money in his pocket, not take it out.
Yeah.
And this is where he introduces that whole assets versus liabilities framework that he's kind of famous for.
Okay. And this is where things clicked for me, but I know it's also where some people get a little confused because Kiyosaki uses these terms differently than, like, your typical financial advisor would, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's important to remember. It's not just about what something's worth on paper. It's about the cash flow. So an asset, for Kiyosaki, it's got to be spitting out cash on a regular basis.
Okay, so like a rental property that brings in rent every month.
Exactly. Or a business that's turning a profit.
Yeah.
Dividends from stocks, even like royalties from a book you wrote.
Okay, I see.
It's all about that consistent income. Liabilities, on the other hand, those are the cash suckers.
Right, the things that drain your bank account.
Exactly. And here's where Kiyosaki throws that curveball. He says, your house, not necessarily an asset, could even be a giant liability.
Yeah, that one always trips people up because we're told buy a house. It's an investment.
Right. It's like the American dream, right? But his point is, unless your house is bringing in more than it's costing you, like if you're renting out a room or whatever, it's probably costing you money every month, mortgage payments, property taxes, repairs, you know the drill.
It's true. You never really think about it that way. We're conditioned to see home ownership as this automatic win, but Kiyosaki challenges that.
Yeah, he wants us to be honest about the numbers. And he uses that great example of a new car. Drive it off the lot, it's instantly lost value, it's a depreciating liability, even though we often think of cars as assets.
That's such a good analogy.
Eh,
And it makes you really stop and think about all the stuff we're told we need.
right.
So if we're in that rat race, working for money, maybe accumulating liabilities without realizing it, how do we actually flip the script?
Mm.
What are Kiyosaki's big ideas for actually building wealth?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're ditching the poor dad script here, right? We're ready to be rich dad, build those assets. But how? Does Kiyosaki give us like step-by-step instructions or what?
Well, not exactly a step by step, but he does lay out three main paths you can take to start building wealth. Real estate's one, then there's investing in the stock market, and finally, entrepreneurship.
So it's not just about being a real estate tycoon like his rich dad. There are other options.
Oh, for sure. And this is where I think rich dad, poor dad gets really interesting. He's not saying everyone needs to go flip houses or become a day trader. It's more about finding what works for you, your risk tolerance,
Sure.
what you're actually interested in and where your strengths lie.
So it's less about following some rigid formula and more about understanding those core principles and then, like you said, figuring out how to apply them to your own situation.
Exactly. And he's really big on this idea of hard work, dedication. You got to be willing to learn and keep learning. It's not about get rich quick schemes. It's about building something sustainable, something that'll last.
It's that whole mindset shift we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
going from consumer to creator, right? Someone who works for their money instead of having their money work for them.
Yes, 100%. And this is where we got to acknowledge Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's a great book, don't get me wrong, but it does have its limitations. Like the world's a different place than it was back when he wrote it.
Oh, totally.
Some of the advice, especially on real estate, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Right. Like just because something worked in the 90s doesn't mean it's going to work
It's
now,
not
right?
smart.
I mean, we can't just blindly follow any book, no matter how popular it is. We got to do our own research, see what makes sense for the current economy.
100%. And that's what Kiyosaki wants, right? He wants us to think critically. Don't just accept conventional wisdom, question things, develop your own financial intelligence.
So it's like he's giving us the tools, the basic framework, but then it's up to us to take it from there.
Yeah, it's like a starting point. Rich dad, poor dad. It's not the be all and end all. It's an invitation to start thinking about money differently, to learn more, to take control of your own financial future.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
You are not stuck. Like your financial situation, it's not set in stone. You have the power to change it. But it starts with your mindset. So start thinking like Rich Dad. Focus on building those assets, keep learning, and don't be afraid to break the mold.
Yes, I love it. So to everyone listening, consider this your permission slip to ditch those limiting beliefs about money, embrace that rich dad mindset, and create the financial future you deserve.